Is it obvious that Jalon Walker is going to be the pick at 8 for the Panthers? Will wide receiver be a focus on day 3 and not on day 1 or day 2? And could the Panthers take a running back there on day 3 as well? Answer all those questions and more on this weekly Friday mailbag edition of Locked On Panthers.
You are Locked On Panthers, your daily Carolina Panthers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of the Locked On Panthers podcast, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, as always, Julian Council, talking Carolina Panthers with you every Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and yes, of course, Friday, your team every day. That's our motto here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Thanks for watching the show right here on YouTube and listening wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. Be sure to follow me, Julian Council, over on Twitter and Blue Sky at Julian Council. Why? Because on Fridays, like today throughout the offseason, I'm right here answering your weekly Friday mailbag questions, unless we have something like the NFL draft going on, which will be the case next week. So next Friday's show will be me reacting to night 1 of the draft and previewing day 2 of the draft. So there will not be a mailbag next week, but the week after that, the mailbag is back. So either way, at me or DM me over on Twitter at Julian Council following the draft next week, and at me over on Blue Sky also at Julian Council to get your questions in for the weekly Friday mailbag in 2 weeks' time. But let's go ahead and get into it. The final mailbag ahead of the 2025 NFL draft next Thursday night. This time next week, we will know who the Panthers selected at 8th overall. That is, if they do select 8th overall and do not decide to either trade up or, more likely, if possible, trade back in the first round. So all that we'll know by this time next week, and I am excited. We finally got through this period of the draft. Thank you to every single guest I've had on so far. Going to talk to 2 more guests next week heading into Thursday night, and then we're going to react, of course, through to the draft at the end of the week, and then all of May we'll be reacting to the draft, get some more people on, and look at all the players that have been added, whether it's been via the draft, and also look at some of the guys via free agency and get some people's opinions on them. But let me get your opinions and your questions on the draft coming up as, again, last Friday mailbag until we have the draft on Thursday. Danny, he starts off the show asking, after listening to Dan Morgan's press conference, clearly the Panthers want to trade down, but if they stay, I feel like this is a lot like last year where everyone knew Xavier Legette was our guy. Feel like this is the same way with Jalon Walker this year, especially with Dan saying they see him as an outside linebacker. How do you feel about the Panthers so publicly sending signals of who they are drafting? I don't know if they're publicly doing that. Last year with Xavier Legette, let's remember, obviously Carolina went down to Columbia for the pro day. They did the same thing this past year. It's not very far to go. They went to Wake's pro day. They go to a lot of the pro days of teams in the local area. And if you look at what the Panthers' needs are this year, what place would you want to go other than Columbia, South Carolina? Because that defensive line was outstanding this past season. I want to see up close and personal what all those guys were able to do this past year. So it makes sense that they were down there this year, but also last year, because what was a need? Receiver. And who broke out was outstanding last year as a receiver at South Carolina, Xavier Legette. So it makes sense that they would go and look at Legette last year and then go and look at guys like Kyle Kennard and look at TJ Sanders and to look at every single one of the dudes there at South Carolina on that defensive line. I don't know if it's as obvious this year as it was last year where, Legette came out and said the Panthers told him if he is there, they're going to take him. And that came to fruition. I don't know if there's a prospect. I don't think Jalon Walker is out there. He hasn't said it. Maybe he will by the time you listen or watch this. He has not come out and said, Carolina told me I'm going to them. And I don't know if the Panthers necessarily loved Xavier Legette going out there and saying that, but they weren't lying to him because, again, it happened. I don't know if they've told Jalon Walker that. Maybe they have. Maybe they have not. It still is a matter of, will he be available? With Legette, personally for me, I didn't really see him as a first-round wide receiver. He was going to be a second-round wide receiver until Carolina decided to move up with Buffalo, in large part because of the relationship that Dan Morgan and Brandon Beane have, as Dan worked under Brandon as assistant general manager. There were a couple of, I think another role, but whatever. Worked under Brandon before coming back to Carolina to take over the AGM role under Scott Fitter a couple of years ago. That really helped them move up. Like, if it wasn't Buffalo, maybe Carolina still gets the 32, gets Xavier, gets fifth-year option. I think it probably cost them a little bit more, probably not that much than what they actually had to give up to get him. So I don't know if it's as obvious as it was last year and that they're publicly sending signals, but you do look at all the mock drafts and you see Mel Kiper, Matt Miller, Jordan Reed, Daniel Jeremiah, all these guys saying Jalon Walker is the pick, and that really has not changed over the course of the last month and a half of this draft cycle. So it feels like it's going to be Jalon Walker, but unlike Xavier Legette, Walker's going to be like a top 10 pick. And there are teams ahead of Carolina who I think could reasonably take him, like Mike Vrabel up there in New England. They could take him. You look at Jacksonville, their defense was dog crap last year too. They could take him, and they already have a former Georgia Bulldog there in Travon Walker as well, who's played really well for them as an edge rusher. So I don't know if it's as clear that he even gets to 8 to Carolina as it was last year, where, yeah, that's 32 picks you got to wait for. But I thought there was a pretty good chance that Xavier Legette would be there, where I still think there's a good chance, but I don't know if you can necessarily bank on that happening as far as Jalon Walker going at 8 to Carolina. But there is a reason why a lot of these mock draft analysts have had the Carolina Panthers taking Jalon Walker, and he makes a lot of sense. So we'll see if that works out. And as far as like public signals, the Panthers did not send any of their representatives down there yesterday to that workout of Jalon Walker and Michael Williams in Georgia. Now, Joe Person, I forget whether he said it on the show or told me afterwards, but the expectation was the Panthers were going to have Dan Morgan and other people head down there for the workout. That did not happen. Dan came out and said, as you mentioned, that they believe he's an outside linebacker, and maybe they have seen enough that they don't really feel like it was necessary for them to go there. And maybe that's trying to get teams to think that they're not interested in Jalon Walker. I don't know, but they were not down in Athens yesterday to check out Jalon Walker and Michael Williams one final time. Next question comes from Will. He says, let's say the Panthers trade back, and it honestly doesn't matter where in this, I don't think. Let's also say that they take an edge rusher that's not named Jalon Walker. Doesn't that feel like a waste? Even if the reason for the Panthers trading back was because Walker was gone, it just really feels like there's so much more positional value at other positions when trading back in the draft, such as corner, receiver, and maybe even tight end, depending on how the board falls. In my opinion, if we don't take Walker in the first, the best edge value seems to be where we'd see ourselves trading up in the second round. So the gist of it from Will is that he thinks like Walker is the guy that Carolina should get. If they don't get him, then getting edge rusher makes more sense in day 2, in particular in the second round. Okay. I don't think it would be a waste if they take an edge rusher like Donovan Ezeraku, who we talked about with Trevor Sikkema. I want to say that was on Monday. All these days blend. Yeah, it was on Monday. I mean, Trevor really got me worked up about it. I know I had some people hit me up saying, wow, your guess has convinced me that Donovan Ezeraku is the pick. Like, if you trade back into the teens, like, I don't know, you get to 15, I don't know who's there, and you take him then, like, is that really a waste for a guy who is a highly productive player who fits a need that Carolina has? Or you get Michael Williams, who when we talked to Clint Chamberlain of Locked On Bulldogs, he had me convinced. And you look at what all the other Georgia guys have done in the league so far, hard not to believe in one of those players coming from that defense in particular at an edge rushing spot, not coming into the league and having success here in Carolina, even if there are going to be question marks, which certainly they're going to be with every prospect out there in this draft, even with, Travis Hunter. There's going to be questions about what he's able to do, but I don't think there's that many questions, but certainly there's questions surrounding every single player. I don't agree that it would be a wasted pick if Carolina takes an edge rusher in the middle rounds, not the middle rounds, but the middle of the first round, if they are not able to get Jalon Walker, and if they do indeed decide to trade back. Like, okay, we talk about corner. Who's the corner you're going to take? You're taking Jahdae Barron. Does that make sense for Carolina if they want to take him? You talk about receiver. Okay, is it Matthew Golden? That would make sense, certainly, as far as what he could be able to do for them down the road. But what kind of role is he going to fulfill this upcoming season with the top 4 guys from last year coming back? And it feels pretty clear to me, at least at this point in time, they're not that interested in getting a receiver that early based off of everything that they've said. Maybe it's a smokescreen, maybe it's not. Tight end, okay, cool, could make sense. I don't want to sit here and say that it's a waste of pick and that there's not positional value for an edge rusher. And I'm not really someone who's like positional value when evaluating the draft. It's like, just tell me who you're taking, who you like. And if you think they're good, like, hell, why not? Send it, go out there and get them and see if they can work out here or wherever they end up going. So yeah, I don't really agree with that. Would be a wasted pick. Edge is what they need to get. And if they can get an edge rusher in the first round, I think even if it's not Jalon Walker, and there's still questions whether he's a true edge. Now, they see him as an outside linebacker, so that's what he'd play in Carolina, and I'm sure he'd also be able to play small ball linebacker if needed in the Jaravero scheme this upcoming season, and we'll see what it looks like. Beyond that, I don't think it's a wasted pick for Carolina at all. All right, let's take a quick pause, come back, and I'll answer more of your weekly Friday mailbag questions right here on Locked on Panthers. Scaling your business requires the right expertise at the right time. Upwork, you can find specialized freelancers in marketing, development, design, and more. Experts ready to help you take your business to the next level. Upwork gives businesses flexibility by connecting them with top freelance talent across multiple industries, including IT, AI, web development, and marketing. Whether you need extra hands for a project or a long-term partner, Upwork makes hiring simple and affordable. If you need help with a marketing campaign, Upwork can connect you with a freelance expert who delivered incredible results. Posting a job is free and simple, and within a day with multiple qualified candidates to choose from. Instead of hiring full-time, Upwork helps find affordable top-tier freelancers to scale your business efficiently. Visit Upwork.com right now and post your job for free. That's UPWORK.com, Upwork.com to connect with top talent and grow your business today. Right back here on Locked on Panthers, 6 days away from the 2025 NFL Draft up in beautiful, I suppose, Green Bay, Wisconsin. May actually get to see Green Bay later on this year as Panthers will be headed up there to face off against the Packers at Lambeau Field, depending upon when that game is. Would love to go see it. Hopefully, of course, it's not in December or in November because it would be way too cold. But over to Chuck now, who says, hey, Julian, hey, Chuck, as we approach the draft next week, if the Panthers pick at 8, what is considered a reasonable reach if there is a guy the Panthers have conviction on there? I keep hearing reports that if the Panthers pick a player like Donovan Ezeraku from Boston College at 8, that would be considered a reach. Even though he had 16.5 sacks last year, I don't understand how the draft reporters determined that. I'm just saying, I don't understand the concept of reach in the draft when some players obviously perform well in college and other players are ranked higher but didn't do as much in college. It's confusing to me. Please help. I am here to help you, Chuck. Absolutely. So here's something that I also don't understand. Like, if you love a guy, does it really matter where you take him? And if they come in and have success, does it really matter? I suppose it does, because, like, say the Panthers, like we saw last year, who did they take? They really liked Trevin Wallace. They took Trevin Wallace in the 3rd round. He came in, ended up having success. Like, if they would have taken him in the 1st round, traded up and got him at 32, kind of would have seemed pretty crazy. And then when he would have started out the season not playing, also have been like, what are we doing here? So I guess I understand it from like that standpoint that while, yeah, you might really love guys later on in the draft, does not mean that you love them at that point in time. Ezeraku, I think it's important. Like, you look at like the numbers that he put up last year, and even go back to a couple of years ago. So he was the ACC Defensive Player of the Year last year, was an All-American. You go back to back in 2022, had 8.5 sacks. It's always important to like look at who they played against, because I know when we look at some of these players and you talk about in particular like Michael Williams and Jalon Walker, especially with Michael, people want to talk about the lack of production. Like, he took a cheap shot week 1 against Clemson and Phil Maffa, and like I think Phil Maffa, solid player. I don't think he's a bad guy, but it was a questionable block that he had below the leg or below the knees there on Michael Williams, and that's something that kept him out for a while. Didn't really have him healthy, and when he was healthy, he came out there and played really well against Texas. And Kelvin Banks is going to go in the 1st round, and Cam Williams, a right tackle, is also going to be drafted probably in day 2. So those are 2 NFL tackles. Now, one of the top tier tackles out there. And you can question, well, should Kelvin Banks be a first rounder if he was out there part of the highlight tape of Mykel Williams and Jalon Walker? Fair question, but God only builds so many of those guys as big as Kelvin Banks. So he was going to get drafted. But you got to look at, like, who are the guys that, like, Ezra played against last year that were great? Like, he had 2 sacks against Florida State in that opener. Florida State's offensive line, like, was terrible. Like, Michigan State wasn't great last year. He had 2 sacks against them. Mizzou, they got Mimbo, and he got 1 sack against him. So, and that's also had 1 tackle for loss. Well, that tackle for loss is a sack. So, solid game there, but 1 sack. Western Kentucky 8 with 3 sacks there. Virginia had 1 sack. Didn't have it against Virginia Tech, and their offensive line, their left tackle, Xavier Chaplin, he's going to be starting at Auburn this upcoming season, playing, like, I think his 5th or 6th year of college football. Didn't get anything against Louisville. Syracuse was solid this year, had 2 against North Carolina. They couldn't block anybody, had 2 against Pitt, 3.5. So outstanding player, but how many NFL guys did he go up against? Probably Mimbo, who's going to be a first rounder, maybe a top 10, 15 pick. Maybe goes ahead to Carolina, ahead of Carolina to the Jets at 7, and had 1 sack going up against that team. I don't know if he went directly against them, but those are the guys you got to look at as far as, like, who did you go up against when you were getting some of these numbers and putting them up. But it's really hard to deny anyone who goes out there and has 16.5 sacks, especially if you're doing it in a Power 4 conference. And you can question the ACC all you want. Certainly, that's totally fair. But the ACC puts out plenty of players into the NFL. The Sun Belt, where Mike Green played at Marshall last year, is not necessarily doing a ton of that. Yes, there are guys that are going to be drafted in the Sun Belt like Mike Green. There are good players in the Sun Belt, but there are certainly far more high-level players in the ACC. And we saw Ezra going against those guys. And you also know that, like, Bill O'Brien was the head coach there. And you can look at, like, how things played out with Bill O'Brien, like, whether he was, like, at Alabama and, like, how things finished in Houston. But he won in Houston. Once he got, like, roster control and tried to pretend like he was Bill Belichick, he was terrible at it. And hell, Belichick was terrible at it when he had roster control at the end of things, which is why he's coaching down the road in Chapel Hill. So Bill O'Brien, I think, is a solid coach. I don't think there's much question about that. You can question kind of how he handled the personnel, how he handled some of the interpersonal relationships with people within that building. But, like, Ezra having been there at BC under an NFL coach, I do think that bodes well and helps him. So maybe it's a reach at 8. But if he comes out there, fills that need, produces, then kind of, like, was it a reach? We'll only find out. I think there's one a couple years ago, Cleveland Ferrell from Clemson. He went to, like, 4th overall to the Raiders, and a lot of draft people are like, oh, that's a reach. Well, like, that's kind of crazy, and he didn't do anything. So these people do know what they're talking about, but they're not always right as far as, like, who you're reaching on and who is not. Because, like, there's guys like, oh, that's a steal. You got them right then and there. It's like, okay, so, like, then teams passed on someone who should have gone a lot higher. I guess it goes both ways. Brian, he says, I know the discussion with the Panthers drafting wide receivers mainly focused in the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd rounds, but are there any day 3 prospects you are interested in? I like Nick Nash out of San Jose State, who, despite being a much older prospect, has a similar build to Ted McMillan and was a Triple Crown winner in the regular season. With Canales coaching, I believe there's a chance that Nash could be an absolute steal. Certainly could be the case, as Nick Nash was very good there at San Jose State this past season, especially a transitional year as their head coach had to leave late to go to Arizona after Nick Saban decided to retire, and that had a chain event where San Jose State lost their coach. So one of kind of crazy things of how that works out. There's a couple guys I'll look at, and I'm not really looking at a big bodied receiver as it's and just going off what they said. They think Xavier can be that wide receiver 1, can be that big bodied guy. And we heard all the DK Metcalf comparisons last year, and that was a big thing because of, like, who the staff is and where they came from and who they had worked with in the past, which was, of course, DK Metcalf himself. So we already know from what Dave Canales said that they think he can be their number 1. And you got to look at it after this season. Xavier Legette, Jalen Coker, both should still be Carolina Panthers in 2026. David Moore, we'll see. I wouldn't bet on that being the case. And then Adam Thielen, I think he's going to retire after this season. So what you're really looking to replace is Adam Thielen, and not doing it now, but in the future. If you can get somebody to come in right away as a day 3 pick and develop behind Thielen and be able to play a couple of snaps as well if you need him to this upcoming season. There's a couple I'm looking at, like Tez Johnson from Oregon via Troy. He's someone I'm looking at. Now, he's very small, and I am a little concerned about whether he can hold up in the NFL. Now, he held up in the Big Ten this past year in that high-powered Oregon offense. He's got the speed, and that's what Carolina really needs, and he's going to be a slot guy. So that's one to look at. Jalen Lane, and I'm going to be talking to Kyle Bailey of WFNZ on Monday. Already did the interview, but Kyle, he brought up Jalen Lane. Kyle's a VT guy, but Jalen Lane, Virginia Tech player, formerly, I believe, was at Middle Tennessee State before that. Solid guy. You can play in the slot. And then one I really do like is Jimmy Horn. Those receivers from Colorado, not just Travis Hunter, were spectacular. LeJontay Wester was also really good, but Jimmy Horn, that's someone who I would be very interested in. He's got great speed, and he got to play kind of an NFL-style offense with Pat Shurmur being the play caller there at Colorado the last year and a half after they kind of sidelined Sean Lewis, who came from Kent State, now is head coach at San Diego State. I like Jimmy Horn a lot. So those would be the three that I would look at, because I'm looking at slot guys. Isaiah Bond would have been there, but now he's kind of worrying about, bail bonds and that kind of stuff. So we'll see how that works out with him and his legal situation. But those would be the three I'm looking at day 3 for Carolina. All right, take one more quick pause, come back here, and answer more of your weekly Friday mailbag questions on Locked On Panthers. Did you know your Fire TV is also an Xbox? Turn any TV into your gaming and entertainment hub with Fire TV Stick 4K devices. No console required. Just grab your pair controller, subscribe, or sign in to Xbox Game Pass Ultimate with EA Play included, and you're ready to play. Dive into hundreds of premium titles from EA Sports College Football 2025 to Call of Duty, Black Ops 6, and Avowed as easily as you stream your favorite shows. It's gaming made simple, and it's all on your Fire TV. With 4K streaming, watch more than 1.5 million movies and TV episodes from your favorite subscribe services like Netflix, Prime Video, Disney Plus, Max, and more. Play high-quality Xbox games at a fraction of the cost of a console. Already have a console? A Fire TV Stick 4K device is more affordable and easier to travel with, allowing you to take your or your kids' games wherever you plug in. Head to Amazon.com/Fire TV Locked On to get started. Xbox Game Pass Ultimate subscription and compatible controller required. Available on select devices, including Fire TV Stick 4K 2nd Gen, Fire TV Stick 4K Max 1st and 2nd Gen, and Fire TV Cube 3rd Gen. All right, a few more questions here on this weekly Friday mailbag edition of Locked On Panthers. Last Friday mailbag ahead of the draft. We'll not have one next Friday on the 25th. We'll be back for a Friday mailbag on May 2nd. So the first Friday in May will be the next time we have a mailbag, as anytime there's any significant event like the draft or any kind of big news that's happening that needs to be discussed, like that will end up being on Friday and not the mailbag. And we will do, there will be a break at some point in the summer months in June. I think after we have, that the Panthers have their mandatory minicamp. That's typically when I don't do the mailbag. So we'll have probably like a couple of weeks there where there won't be one. But in the meantime, starting again on May 2nd, all through May, and then probably the first couple of weeks of June, we'll have the mailbag here for y'all on Locked On Panthers. But Nick now asking a question here on the show saying, there is not enough talk about running back being a need for Carolina. Chuba's good, not great. Rico is on a 1-year deal, and Brooks is already looking like an injury bust. Not his fault, obviously. With the depth of the running back class this year, which prospects do you think have the potential to be game breakers outside of day one? P.S. I'm thinking Quinshaw Judkins in round 3 will be the steal of the draft. Okay. So we'll see. I don't know where Quinshaw Judkins is going to go, but he was outstanding at Ole Miss. I want to say he set our SEC freshman running back rushing record. And you got to think about the backs that have come out of the SEC. Herschel Walker, Bo Jackson. Just some outstanding dudes like Derrick Henry. A lot of all-time greats at that position have played in the Southeastern Conference, a ton of different schools. I mean, Emmitt Smith went to Florida. There's a ton of great dudes. And Quinshaw Judkins went out there at Ole Miss, of all places. And I set an SEC freshman rushing record. And then went to Ohio State last year, helped them win a national championship with Trevion Henderson, who's probably another day 2 guy, as his running mate there in the backfield. But the prospect I'm looking at And I guess before I get there, the situation at running back right now, I think is a good situation for Carolina for this season. Like Chuba Hubbard is under contract for the next 4 seasons. Really look at it as the next 2, but it could be possibly the next 4, maybe probably 3 for Chuba. I do think he is a good player, and I agree he's not a great running back. And there's very few great running backs in the NFL, which is why I've always been like, you don't pay those guys. You look at Saquon Barkley, you look at Chuba Hubbard, and like obviously one's not like the other, which is why Saquon gets paid what he gets paid. Like Christian McCaffrey, Chuba Hubbard, one's not like the other. There's only like 3 or 4 guys like Saquon and like Christian McCaffrey as far as at that elite level in the league. And those are the only guys who really need to be paid. Everybody else, just recycle them. Go draft somebody else. Don't spend your money on running back. But Chuba is part of the culture that they want to set here in Carolina. And he came out immediately after getting paid and had the best game of his career. I don't necessarily, when I look at him and I look at where the Carolina Panthers were when that happened, while I don't like love it, I understand it. And he's a good dude. So those are the kind of guys you want to see Carolina pay. So I do think with Chuba this year, Rico Dowdle as well, good situation. What happens with Jonathon Brooks past this season, it's kind of wait and see. And we have had people on here who have come up and said that the Panthers should draft a running back. And if they do draft a running back, the guy that I love for them is Dylan Sampson. I think Dylan Sampson is absolutely the kind of dude who would fit into this locker room and what Dave Canales is trying to build. When you look at Dylan Sampson last year, he broke the single season rushing record when it comes to touchdowns at Tennessee with 19. Also total touchdowns with 22, and it had 1,485 yards at the University of Tennessee. I know Tennessee has had a lot of issues since 98 when they last won a national championship, and they went through like 15 years of just complete ineptitude. Like when I was in Nashville and I was covering Tennessee from that area, there was a complete joke with Butch Jones. And then when they brought in Jeremy Pruitt, I said it like 50 times in his press conference, man can't speak. Didn't even know what the asparagus was 5 years prior to that. If you watched 2 days on Hoover High, you know what I'm talking about. It was a joke, but like they've gotten back. They're better, and they just had some craziness last week with Nico Iamaleava wanting $4 million and that not working out for him. But if you watch Tennessee last year, you know that offense was brutal to watch. Could not score in the first half against Alabama, against Florida, and against Arkansas 3 straight weeks. And you got a guy coming back months later saying, I want $4 million. You didn't do anything. You weren't the reason Tennessee went to the playoff. The reason Tennessee went to the playoff last year, y'all, is that defense was outstanding. We talk about defensive lines that are really good, like South Carolina's. Tennessee right there, up there with them, maybe better. I think South Carolina's person was better, but they had a great defensive line and some really good interior guys like Omar Norman Lott to look at in this draft. But it was a defense, and it was Dylan Sampson. Nico didn't do anything. He wasn't good. Unless they played Vanderbilt. But other than that, when they played winning Power 5 teams, he wasn't great. So I look at it like Dylan Sampson carried that offense. That was brutal to watch last season. He was the only thing about Tennessee outside of their defense that was worth watching last year. And he is somebody I think that Carolina should absolutely be interested in. Team leader, SEC Offensive Player of the Year, in a world where, especially in college, only thing that ever matters is the quarterback has to have this award and that award, blah, 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 blah. Not a damn one of those quarterbacks in the Southeastern Conference were better than Dylan Sampson last year. And rightfully, he won that award. That's a guy. I mean, you can hear it, man. Like, I love Dylan Sampson. I would be interested in him coming to Carolina. Absolutely. Like, that's the guy they should be looking at. All right. Final question comes from Mike for Friday Mailbag. Who are your top 3 players you'd pick realistically if you were the Panthers general manager? Well, I am not Dan Morgan, unfortunately. I do not have a membership over at Longview, which I assume he would have because he lives down in that area, and that's kind of where all those guys go play at. Whatever. But Mike says he would go Jalon Walker, Donovan Ezeraku, and Teteroa McMillan. For me, I agree with you, Jalon Walker. That would be the number 1. Number 2, actually, I would have Tyler Warren. We talked about him earlier this week with Zach Sako, the host of Locked On Nittany Lions, and I had questioned, is he worth going in the top 10? You look at Carolina, I mean, there's talk about a need of a number 1 wide receiver, but we certainly know there's a need at tight end. They're going to have to add at some point at that position, I would think, in this draft, and Tyler Warren could be that guy. Now, from what I understand, they're not that interested in taking a tight end early. if at all. We'll see if it happens with their 9 picks, but that would be someone I'd be looking at, Tyler Warren, who could be one of those X factors at that position and help the passing game. And then the third one I'm looking at is Will Johnson. He would fit the zone scheme that Carolina runs. Now, when we talk to Isaiah Hull of Locked On Wolverines, he's of the belief that he can do it all. I mean, cross-trained at different spots and going back to his high school career, but even at Michigan, that Will Johnson, he can be more than just a guy who needs to be in a zone scheme, which is primarily what Ejiro Rivera is running here in Carolina. So I would look at Jalon Walker, Tyler Warren, Will Johnson as the 3 there at 8 overall for Carolina. That's going to wrap up this edition of the Locked On Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Hosted by yours, Julie and Council. Again, y'all subscribe, follow the show for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. And be sure to follow me, Julie and Council, over on Twitter and Blue Sky at Julie and Council, as the weekly Friday mailbag takes a pause next week, but is back again on May 2nd. So either at me or DM me on Twitter or at me over on Blue Sky at Julie and Council to get those questions in following the draft next week. In the meantime, be safe, be happy, be whole. As always, keep pounding, and I will talk to you on Monday as Kyle Bailey of WFNZ joins the show to talk about the Panthers with the vibes heading into the draft next week.